Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of An Evening with the Philosophical Muser. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Scott Aaronson, who is a theoretical computer science and professor of computer science at the University of Texas in Austin. And welcome, Scott.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really chuffed to have you with us. It's very timely as well because you know those Facebook memories that pop up from the past showing you old posts. Well,
Yeah.
one of them popped up this week, and it was a post I'd written in about 2013, I think it was, and it was the people that I'd really like to have a conversation with who are currently alive today. And I'd made a list of people, and it had E.O. Wilson on it, had Martin Scorsese, Paul McCartney, Deirdre McCloskey, the economist, David Friedman, Patti Smith, Joni Mitchell, people like that, and yourself, Scott Aaronson. You were
Well,
on
I'm
my
I'm I'm, I'm truly honored to be on that list, to be on such a list.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
though I don't deserve it, and I'm happy to be alive still 10 years after you wrote that.
yeah, absolutely. It's a distinguished list, and I'm very glad you're on it. And I think the only person who hasn't survived the list is Cormac McCarthy, who died quite recently.
Well,
The
E.O. Wilson.
Oh, is he dead? Oh gosh, have I
Yeah,
missed him?
yeah,
Yeah,
he
God. Oh,
passed away a couple years ago.
did
Yeah.
he? Oh, bless. Okay,
Yeah.
well, he won't be coming on the show then, really. Bless him. Okay, so a lot of people won't know exactly why it's so exciting for me to have you on, but many will, and it's about a theorem called Aumann's agreement theorem, which I've written about before and blogged about, and it's in two of my books. Um, and I know that you, Scott, you were into mathematics before you got formally into computer programming, and I guess that's probably where you came to learn about the theorem, is it, and stumbled upon it. So I'm really familiar with it, and I've spoken about it a lot in my words, but I'd love you to explain it in your words, so to give the viewers an understanding of what it is, and hear it from your perspective and why it's such an intriguing theorem.
Well, Aumann's theorem was proved in 1976 in a now famous paper called "Agreeing to Disagree," and I think it was about a 3 or 4 page paper, and the statement and the proof of this theorem within it was about one paragraph, and yet that is maybe the most recognizable thing for which Aumann later won the Nobel Prize in economics. Okay,
Mm.
so it was that surprising to people, and basically what it says is that under certain reasonable sounding assumptions, two rational people should never be able to agree to disagree.
Mm.
Okay, so if they have common what we call common knowledge of each other's opinion, which means they know each other's opinion, they know that they know it, they know that they know that they know it, and so forth. Right. And by the way, one of the things that Auman's paper is famous for is for sort of formalizing the very concept of common knowledge, right? And explaining, why is that different from merely knowing each other's opinion, right? They
Mm.
have to not only know, but know that they know, and know that they know that they know, and so on and so on, right? If they're in that state, we call it common knowledge, and it says that under that condition, actually their opinions must be equal. Okay, they must have the same opinion.
Mm.
Now there is one key assumption that underlies this, which is called the assumption of a common prior. Okay, so the setting that we imagine is that we have two people, say, in computer science, we like to call them Alice and Bob. Okay, and they and there is some probability distribution over all the possible states of the world, right? So there's and we imagine that to the extent that Alice and Bob might disagree with each other, it is only because they have different information, right? So in a complete vacuum, if we imagined Alice and Bob, I don't know, as souls who haven't been born yet, right? Then in that sort of original condition, they would assign the same probability to any possible state of affairs, to Rishi Sunak winning the election, or to it raining tomorrow, or any event at all. Okay, but then they might disagree with each other because they have been born and they've lived different lives and they've accumulated different experiences, right, which have given them different knowledge. Okay, so maybe Alice has checked the weather report and Bob has not, right? Or Bob, knows people in politics and Alice doesn't. Okay, and so because they have different information, of course, if you ask them to estimate something like with what probability will it rain tomorrow, or with what probability will this candidate win the election, then they might give you different answers, right? Alice using the information that she has, Bob using the information that he has. Okay, but what Aumann's theorem says is that if their opinion ever becomes common knowledge, okay, so Alice knows Bob's estimate, right, and Bob knows that Alice knows his estimate, okay, and Alice knows that Bob knows that Alice knows, and so on and so on. And likewise for Alice's estimate, Bob knows it, Alice knows that Bob knows it, and so on. Then actually their estimates must be the same. Okay, so that sort of restores the situation in this hypothetical original condition before they ever accumulated different knowledge and different experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So for any that don't know about common priors, so basically what we're talking about Bayesian priors, aren't we? So in probability and statistic, Bayes' theorem, it describes the probability of an event based on prior knowledge of conditions that might be related to the event. So if the risk of X is known to increase with, say, Y, then rather than taking statistics from the set as a whole, Bayesian probability looks to assess X more accurately relative to changes in Y, as you said with the election example. Right. So I remember when I first stumbled upon this theorem. It was almost like it was like a light bulb moment, because it's like when somebody, when they articulate something that you've thought for a long time and you've done work on for a long time, but bringing it together so elegantly and in such a succinct way was really liberating to me. And what it did for me was it gave me a renewed sense of hope that actually if people can agree in theory on a relatively short execution time, providing they are both seeking the truth and without too many impinging factors, that it helps to further and advance the conversation, I think, in terms of how we can start to, make progress as people. It was great to see that theorem formalized, and the part that you've proven, which is your paper, The Complexity of Agreement, in 2005. So that's more about is it about the execution time, and you're elaborating?
It is. Yeah. So I can tell you the story. In 2003 or so, I was reading things online, and I came across the webpage of an economist at George Mason University named Robin Hanson, who had an enormous number of heterodox opinions, even crazy sounding opinions, then as now. And maybe some listeners have encountered him, but
Yeah, I know he is. Yeah, yeah.
he had a paper with another economist named Tyler Cohen
Mm.
called "Are Disagreements Honest?" I think, or "Are
Okay.
Disagreements Rational?" And it explained Aumann's theorem, and that was the first time that I had ever encountered it. And my first reaction on seeing it was that I must have misunderstood. Right, this can't possibly be right.
Yeah.
That sort of rational people should never agree to disagree about anything, right? And so then my immediate reaction was to start looking for loopholes in it, right? Which indeed many people have done over the past half century, right? Was not the first. Now, one loophole, might be this assumption of a common prior, right? So we're assuming, not only that Alice and Bob are Bayesians, as you
Mm.
said, right? Which I mean that seems kind of that seems pretty reasonable. Being Bayesian could even be taken as one definition of rationality,
Yeah.
right? It just says that if you have probabilities for different possible events, then you are updating those probabilities, as you gain new knowledge, in the way that math says you should, right?
Mm.
That's really all that being a Bayesian means. Okay, but then the setup of Ohmann's theorem somehow goes further than that in saying that, well, first of all, Alice and Bob have probabilities for every, right. They're never unwilling to say probabilities, right. They always have a
Mm.
you ask them, is there life on other planets, right? Is there a God, right? They have a probability for it, right? Everything is a question of probabilities for them, and crucially, until they gain knowledge, their probabilities are the same, right? And that is kind of a metaphysically weird part here, right? And I thought, why should we assume that their probabilities, their prior probabilities, as they're called, are the same? And but in their paper, Robin Hanson and Tyler Cohen had an argument for that sort of just completely rocked my world, and and still does, I think. And their argument was the following. Okay, that if you were Alice, right, then it's not inevitable that as you're thinking about it, that you would have been Alice, right? Maybe you would have been born as Bob instead, right? And so the
Yeah.
very fact that you are you and not someone else is just another piece of information, that another piece of evidence that you've gotten, that you should then conditionalize on, in the Bayesian way,
Yeah, I
right?
think you said, didn't you, in your paper that
Right.
if Alice and Bob exchanged everything they knew, then
That's right.
they would
Oh,
agree
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
everything.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm coming to that. Yes, but so yeah, so what they said is, the very fact that you are the person you are and have the DNA that you have, and so forth, these could all just be treated as knowledge that you've obtained, and that you've conditionalized on, right? And somehow, the sort of indexical facts, the fact that you are you, should not change what your opinions are compared to, if you were someone else,
Yeah.
except insofar as it has given you different information, right?
Mm.
Except insofar as it has given you, maybe privileged information that other people don't have, that you can then use as evidence. Okay, but then Ohmann's theorem comes into play and says that if your opinion is if your opinions are common knowledge, then the fact that you have different evidence doesn't matter anymore, right? Then your opinion should really be the same. Okay, so then the next thought that I had was that, well, this, this must be sort of, maybe this is true in principle, but this, I mean, this clearly doesn't describe sort of real life disagreements, right? And in real life, when you see people disagree with each other, right? Really, they don't just like exchange some messages and then come, get common knowledge of what each other's opinions are and then come to agreement, right?
Yeah.
We almost never see that happen. More often, we see two people get even more polarized than before,
Yeah.
right? As the result of disagreeing with each other, right? So I thought that maybe the mismatch between this theorem and reality has to do with complexity. Has to do with, well, how long of a conversation would you need for the people to actually attain common knowledge of each other's opinions and actually come to agreement. So I mean, so it is clear, as you said, that if the two people exchanged all the knowledge that they had, if they basically uploaded their entire brains, worth of
Mm.
information into each other, well, then at that point they effectively are the same person again,
Yeah.
right? At that point, it is obvious that they'll have the same opinion because there is nothing anymore to break the symmetry and to give them a different opinion. Okay, but I said, in real life, that would take, an entire lifetime, right? Like basically, if I were to have all the knowledge that you have in order to have the same opinion as you, I would basically have to have lived your life, right? And you would have to have lived my life in order to have, share my opinions. So I
Yeah.
thought that maybe that's the loophole. Okay, so I thought maybe I can prove a theorem, showing that the length of the conversation has to be very large. Okay, so now we come to the so Aumann's theorem didn't talk directly about a conversation between Alice and Bob, right? It just sort of assumed that Alice and Bob are in this condition of common knowledge,
Mm.
however they got into it. And then it says that therefore their opinions must be the same. Okay, but then later authors like Agina Koplos and Paula Marchakis, I think in the 1980s, thought about how would Alice and Bob actually come to that condition of common knowledge. And so they imagined a conversation that would go as follows. Okay, that Alice, would basically just tell Bob, I think that there's a 70% chance of rain tomorrow. And then Bob would say, oh, well, that's interesting. Now that you say that, the fact that you've said that causes me to update my opinion. And now I think that there's a 60% chance of rain tomorrow. And Alice says, well, now that you've said that, I actually think there's a 65% chance of rain tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then eventually, Bob says, oh, well, now I also think it's a 65% chance, right? And then they agree.
Mm.
Okay. And so basically what Agina Koplos and Paula Marchakis noted was that if there's only a finite number of possible states of the world, so say like a finite amount of knowledge that Alice and Bob could have, then that conversation will terminate after a finite amount of time. It will end with Alice and Bob having the same opinion and with common knowledge that they have the same
Yeah.
opinion, as Aumann's theorem would have predicted. Okay, now the fascinating thing about this conversation is that at no point are they ever saying evidence, right? At no point are they ever giving reasons why they think it will or won't rain. Okay, all they're doing is stating their opinions, right? And their opinions given each other's opinions. Okay, and yet that is enough for them to reach that state of common knowledge. Okay, so now um, and now coming back to Robin Hanson, right? He wrote articles in the early 2000s where he said there's something else that's very strange about that conversation. Okay, now if we imagined, like if you think back to like a conversation that you had with someone whose opinion disagreed, maybe what happens is that you start out like in two different places and then you get even more polarized as you argue,
Mm.
right? But
Yeah.
in the best case, you'd say, you start out kind of far away and then maybe you compromise a little bit, right? Like you say 20%, I say 80%. And then I say, okay, maybe you have a point. Maybe I'll lower my estimate to 70%, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you'll raise yours to 30%. And maybe in that way, we'll sort of gradually inch closer to agreement. Okay. And what Robin pointed out is that an Aumannian conversation, this kind where we're Bayesians with common priors and we're just stating each other's opinions, it does not look like that at all. Okay. In fact, our opinions follow a random walk. Okay. Which means that like my own estimate of my future, I should never be able to predict the direction in which I will disagree with you in the future, right? Or predict in which direction my opinion will move. So like if I'm at 20% and you're at 80%, let's say, right? I should not be able to predict that as a result of talking to you, I will move closer to you. I will go up to 30%. It should be just as likely from my standpoint that I'll go down, that talking to you will cause me to go down to 10% or whatever. And the reason for that is that if I knew in what direction my opinion was going to shift, then I should have shifted it already. Okay. So
Interesting.
this is the reason for this random walk property, right? That our opinions, if someone watched us, would just be jumping around totally, erratically. Okay. There's only one type of conversation, that I've had in real life that even approaches that, and that's like when I'm arguing at a blackboard, with someone about a math problem, let's say, right? And we might be, I might think that a conjecture is true, and the other person might think it's false, and then 5 minutes later we might be arguing just as vehemently, but now the positions have shifted. Now the positions have switched, right? And now I think it's false, and the other person thinks it's true, right? That basically never happens with politics, with religion, with anything like that, right? But
No.
okay, so okay, but now that once we understand that the opinions follow a random walk, then we can take a step further. And this is what I did in my 2005 paper. And we can ask, how long would the conversation have to continue for before the two people probably approximately agree with each other? Okay. And so now the theorem that I proved in 2005 says that the number of messages that we have to exchange before we come to a approximate agreement is actually completely independent of how much knowledge we have, right? It doesn't matter how long we've lived for, how many books we've read, how much experience we have. All that matters is with what probability do we want to agree with each other, as judged by our shared prior, and within what accuracy do we want to agree with each other. Okay. And basically, I proved a bound, right, which says that, like, if we want to agree with let's say probability of 1 minus delta, let's say, and if we want to agree, let's say, about some probability, which is a number between 0 and 1, and we want to agree to within an accuracy of epsilon, then the number of messages that we have to exchange, so the length of our conversation, goes like 1 divided by delta times epsilon squared.
Hmm.
That's it. Okay. So for example, if we wanted to agree, at least 90% of the time, or at least if we want to go into the conversation expecting that, at least 90% of the time we will agree to, within, at most 10%, let's say, then, we might have to, exchange a certain number of messages. The theorem would then say at most 1,000. In practice, it would probably be much, much fewer than that. Okay. But it says that at any rate, it can't be more. Okay. So that showed that, the length of the conversation was not the loophole to Aumann's theorem that I had thought it was. And so, it's always good to when math, doesn't just formalize what you thought was obvious, but actually challenges it, and changes your view of something. So that was what I wrote a paper about.
Okay, so a couple of questions then.
Yeah.
Particularly on the random walk. So
Yes.
let's imagine a search space.
Hmm.
We'll call that state one, okay,
Hmm.
and we have
Hmm.
two agents opening. So let's say that consists of n bits. You're saying that, and you said, I think, was it Alice and Bob? You said so.
Sure.
The theorem requires a prior probability distribution over, say, two n possible states, and you're saying that it requires them to calculate expectations over that distribution and update it conditioned on
Yes.
the new information. And
Yes.
you're
And
saying,
for now, we're assuming that Alice and Bob don't face any limitations of computing power,
right,
right? I also proved a theorem that starts to deal with the case that they're limited in their computational abilities. Okay, but in the theorem I told you before, we were only interested in the length of their conversation.
right, and you think that the execution time is shorter than Aumann predicted. Is that
Well, Omen just didn't make a prediction
he
about
didn't
it.
make a prediction? Okay,
It's just not the question that he was focused on.
right, okay. So
So,
and
yeah, yeah.
you so in terms of the random walk. So
Yes.
and you said Robin
And
Hanson came up with the idea that that that's random
well,
walk.
I mean, it was, it may have been known to people before him, but he wrote a paper that made it very, very explicit.
My my contention, having heard that,
Mm.
would be that it's probably going to it's probably not going to follow an exact random walk. It'll probably be there'll be some bias to the random walk. So it might be, to all
Well,
intents and purposes, have lots of random elements, but
okay, but the question is, if you know that your future updates to your opinion will be biased in a certain direction, okay, then and you're a Bayesian, right? Then the
hmm,
question is always, why haven't you updated your opinion in that direction already? Right.
well,
If you right, so there's one thing that seems to help a lot for people to get intuition about this is to consider the stock market, right?
yeah,
Like if it can be reliably predicted that a certain stock will go up, right, then the market should have already priced that in,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The
sure,
stock should have gone up, all right. It should not be, and this is the this is why, the if you look at the prices of stocks over time, they actually do seem to follow what looks a lot like a random walk. Not always. There are all sorts of complicating factors, but and in fact, if a broker tries to sell you a stock, promising that it's going to go up, right, then the obvious retort would be, well, then why are you selling it to me? Right.
exactly, yeah, yeah,
Right. So you could say, the very um there's actually a version of Ohmann's theorem about, the prices of commodities, right, that would say that we should, no one should ever be engaging in purely speculative trade, right? I mean, if
yeah,
people have different liquidity needs or whatever, then or do they simply need food, they need a house, then these are all reasons to trade. But they should never be engaging in speculative trade, because the very fact that someone wants to sell you something, means that they must know something that you don't. That says that it's less valuable than they're saying that it is, right?
yeah. Okay,
If
so
if you're if you're both rational.
let
Yeah, yeah.
I'll try to illustrate a random walk just in case anyone doesn't know what that
Sure,
is, and
sure.
and we'll try to use that to work out if we think that it is following a random walk process. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
if we picture a random walk being a drunkard leaving a pub, and
Yes.
he has an equal probability of turning left or right, then what we're saying is over the course of his journey from the pub, we can't predict where he might be in n number of steps. That would be a random walk.
Right,
Now,
right. Well, it's saying a little bit more than that. It's saying, if you want to know the distribution over places that he'll be, you can predict that it will follow a bell curve centered
yes,
around the pub, right? It will follow, what we call a Gaussian distribution.
Gaussian distribution. Yeah, absolutely. So
Yes.
let's say, for example, that in the case of this particular drunkard,
Hmm.
that there are constraints on his walk, but he may not know exactly what those constraints are, but there are constraints acting on him. And let's try to analogize that with the psychology of the agents involved. So let's say, for example, that Alice and Bob are engaged in a discussion about politics,
Hmm.
and it's true that they don't necessarily know why they believe everything they believe, and it's also true, as you say, that had there been indications prior to the discussion that there's a good chance that they might well have believed something else anyway, as you say, if they thought it already, why haven't they already changed their mind? But and this I think goes to the heart of where I was picking up Aumann's agreement theorem in my books, is that there are a lot of factors that are driving the disagreements, and the way that, as you say, we often find humans diverging when they should, with more rational persuasion, be converging. So
Yes.
the fact that there are psychological biases and tribal affiliations and all sorts of unconscious things acting on it,
Hmm.
isn't it more likely that it's following a slightly biased random walk?
Oh, well, I mean, in real life, I mean, we know that there are countless ways that we deviate from rationality,
Yeah,
right? And and now there's almost like an embarrassment of riches in terms of asking like where could we be going wrong such that we deviate from the prediction of Aumann's theorem, right? And the question is more which one is it, like which of our many failings,
yeah,
which are the most relevant ones, right, that cause us to deviate from this. I mean, now it's important to say like we have these intuitions, like for example, that in real life, like maybe people could come to agreement, could come to understand each other's perspective, but in order for that to happen, it's very important that they share their experiences, right, that they share their evidence, that they explain where they're each coming from, right,
yeah,
and then maybe there's a chance, right. And what's so surprising about Aumann's theorem and about this sort of Ginakopoulos Polemarchakis conversation protocol is that it says no, none of that is needed at all, right. All that is needed is for them to reach a state of common knowledge of what each other's opinions are, right. And so that is it's sort of putting a point on how different this sort of idealized Bayesian rationality is from whatever it is that we're actually doing. Okay,
yeah,
but okay, but it's important to say though, that here's another possible loophole that we haven't touched on. If you are perfectly rational, you're a Bayesian and so forth, but and you're also perfectly honest, but you have reason to believe that I am either irrational or dishonest, right? So I'm
mm,
not telling you my true opinions, or my true opinions are just completely off the wall. I can't even do the Bayesian calculations correctly, right? Or I have a completely absurd prior, right? I just have my prior says that there's the probability is almost 100% that the world is being run by lizard men from space, and like no, basically nothing that I learn can budge me from that fixed opinion, right? If I am either irrational or dishonest in any of those ways, well then you should devalue my opinion accordingly,
Yeah.
right? And even if you think that there's a chance that I am irrational or dishonest, or if it's not common knowledge, right? So I don't so I don't know that that I'm rational, right? I think that you might be doing things differently because you suspect that I am irrational, right?
Yeah, well,
You know, so
yeah, this is
so
what happens a
so
lot in
so sort of
politics,
so,
isn't it?
right.
Yeah.
So sort of in the background of this I don't know, a utopian picture of people who just all agree with each other merely because they all know each other's opinions, is the idea that we have a common prior, right? And as a special case, it includes common knowledge of each other's honesty and rationality, that we're all
Mm.
executing the protocol correctly, right? And that is seems like not our world, to put it mildly.
No.
Like maybe only very, very occasionally, as with scientists arguing at a blackboard, and even then not always, right? But only very, very occasionally might we approach that ideal.
Yeah, I mean, you you can have a discussion, particularly on religious subjects or political, where you don't even get off the starting base really, because
Right.
the levels of distrust are so prominent that however much you try to employ rational persuasion, you're probably never going to even get past the starting block. But
Yes.
I wanted to talk about something else as well in relation to that,
Sure.
which is complexity. So,
Yes.
um, in my book, I mentioned the tribal affiliations and the confirmation bias, and the fact
Mhm.
that we don't often have sufficient information on which two people could both come together and converge on an opinion about something. And one of the other elements I talked about in that was the level of complexity, and I wanted to just ask you about that in relation to your paper. So let me just paint a scenario. So
Mhm.
if you have your two mathematicians, for example, at the blackboard, and
Yes.
maths is probably one of the subjects whereby, as long as the agents are honest and looking to converge upon a theory together, then it's one of the least emotive subjects in terms of getting two people to agree. So if you both want to formulate a theorem mathematically,
Mhm.
and let's say it's a relatively simple equation, and let's say the
Mhm.
mathematicians are only at
Mhm.
college level, so
Right.
they're
Well, we
not.
could say, we all agree on what the ground rules are, at least,
Yes.
right? I mean, there are a few other domains that are like that. Maybe chess, maybe certain sports, but like it said that that the sports page in the newspaper is the one where you have to be least concerned about being lied to, right?
Yeah.
Or biases, right? There are certain fields where there is an underlying ground truth that we might not know, but at any given time, but we all agree that it's there, and once we see it, then we all have to agree about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take so that the imagine that the college level mathematicians are going to agree on this pretty straightforwardly and with fairly short execution time. Now,
Mm.
let's take something really hot, like let's say a big political dispute.
Mm.
I mean, in our country, in the UK, it's Labour and the Conservatives.
Yes.
Yours is Republicans, Democrats, and you could
Yes.
certainly find people who are very hardwired culturally to those and socially to those beliefs that are unlikely to change their minds.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of the level of complexity, one of the things I said in my book is that it's probably going to be a barrier in some regards, because big subjects like religion and
Mhm.
politics and socio-cultural elements that are attached to those, it's going to be a bit of a minefield for the agents to gather everything that's required and put enough computational processing power into their thinking
Mhm.
to capture a lot of complex things, particularly around metaphysical elements to do
Mhm.
with religion and God and
Mhm.
stuff. And
Mhm.
in your paper, I
Yes.
think you said that one of your conclusions, and you said it was a surprising conclusion, that
Yes.
complexity wasn't a major barrier to agreement. So
Right.
is is that is that something that you could just elaborate on in terms of why you think it isn't? Or are we talking about a different sort of complexity here?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So let's unpack this
Yeah.
because you've been using the word complexity, right? But if by complexity you just mean the amount of knowledge that there is, to learn in a given subject, right? The amount of information, let's say, the number of bits that Alice and Bob may have learned that may have caused them to have a different opinion,
Yeah.
right? Or even the computation that they have to do to calculate what their opinion should be given those bits, right? My results give strong evidence that none of that is the limiting factor at all that ought to prevent them from coming to Omenian agreement.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. The length of the conversation, for example, that they have to engage in is completely independent of how much knowledge they have, of that measure of the complexity of the topic. Okay. But listening to your question, you seem to have been using the word complexity possibly in a different sense, right? Which is how difficult is it to even cash out our disagreement into something empirical at all, right?
Yes, that's right.
So,
Yes. Yes.
right. So the whole framework of Auman's theorem and of common knowledge and so forth has presumed that the thing that we are disagreeing about is sort of some underlying truth of the state of the world,
Yeah.
right? And it's the kind of thing where as we get more evidence, we update our knowledge of the state of the world, right? And this seems clearly appropriate to questions like, is it going to rain tomorrow?
Mm.
Right? Like, right now we're in a state of partial information about that, right? We can see the clouds, we can, see the humidity measurements and so forth. Tomorrow we will have much more information about that question, right?
Yeah.
We could just look out the window and that will let us do a Bayesian update, right?
Yeah.
Likewise with the question of who is going to win the election, or even scientific questions. What is the mass of the Higgs boson, right? Is there intelligent life on other planets, right? That's something where you can imagine that in the future as we explore space more, we will get more information about that.
Mm.
Um, but a lot of the disagreements that people have in real life, right, they're really about well, whose tribe is better, right? Who deserves to win, right, in such and such legal conflict, in this war, in this political conflict, right? Who is basically on the side of good and who
Mm.
is basically on the bad side. And the trouble, with that kind of question is that no matter what the facts are, you can always reinterpret the facts, in light
Yeah.
of your sort of pre-existing belief that sort of tells you, okay, who is basically good, but may have, occasionally made some mistakes, right? Versus, who is basically bad, but who may have gotten some factual question right by accident, but that still doesn't affect their fundamental badness, right? And it's not even clear how you cast those questions into the Bayesian framework at all.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
I interact a lot with the rationality community, right? Which is based around websites like Less Wrong, and the writings of this guy Eliezer Yudkowsky, right? And so what they are constantly trying to do is get people to bet on their beliefs, right? Get people to, instead of just saying something, abstractly, like, I believe that climate change is a huge issue, right? Well, okay, what specifically do you believe? With what probability do you think that there will be hurricanes in 10 years that cause this much destructive power, right? Or, that cause this much destruction, right? And give me your over and under, right? Give me and I was like think about it more actuarially, right? And so,
Yes.
they're constantly doing that. And the whole idea is that once you force people to cash out their ideological beliefs into predictions for what they expect to happen in the future, then we have some chance of getting people to agree, right? Then they might realize that things are more uncertain than they thought they were, right? Or it might force them to actually research it. And when they do make a prediction, then they might find out that their prediction was wrong, right? And then they have to pay, they have to concede the bet, and that might force them to update. So Robin Hanson, who I mentioned before as the person who introduced me to Auman's theorem, through his paper about it, he is maybe the single thing that he's best known for is that he invented the idea of prediction markets, right? So he believes that for any sort of questions about the future, who will win this election, will this policy, will this economic policy lead to lower inflation or not, right? Will this foreign policy, if pursued, will it lead to a war between these countries or not? He thinks that these questions should all just be traded on a stock market, essentially, right? And then whatever, if like there's a stock that pays $1, if these two countries go to war, and let's say now it's trading at 60 cents, then you can learn from that the best consensus right now of all the best experts who are trading on that market is that there is a 60% chance that event will happen, right? So he thinks that forcing prediction markets would be a way to force people to bet on their beliefs, and in that way the real world could sort of better approach this Bayesian or Aumannian rationality. Now, I should say, there are now lots of prediction markets that are actually in use. They tend to, get in the news, whenever there's an upcoming election. Okay, but at least in the U.S., prediction markets are severely hampered by regulatory barriers. Right, they're considered to be gambling, and online, and they're regulated as if they were online gambling, right? And some people think, well, they should, if people are allowed to trade, stocks and bonds and futures, right, and in companies which sort of indirectly reflect these questions, our beliefs about what's going to happen in the world, then why shouldn't we also be allowed to trade on futures that are just directly about what is true, what is going to happen, right? And
Yeah.
so that might be a way of trying to tackle this complexity problem, right? When people have these complicated packages of ideological beliefs, trying to break them down into individual sub questions that can be factually resolved, right? And which you could then literally bet on or have prediction markets on,
Yeah,
right?
that's right, because
Yeah,
we know from anecdotal and statistical and empirical evidence, don't we, that people, when some of the big problems in society with wrong decision making are when the decisions that are made are divorced from the stake of the individual and the context.
Yes.
And absolutely, you see how people behave politically in terms of how they want the economy to be run and all the different incentives behind that. You'll see that people converge upon the smartest economics often when the stakes are most applicable to their own situation. I mean, there's even I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's an economist called John Harsanyi, a
Yes.
Hungarian economist who came up with the amnesia
Shared the
principle, which
Nobel
is
Prize with John Nash, right?
absolutely based on, well, he was, and Rawls' veil of ignorance was based on that, wasn't it? And the idea being that, I mean, I think Rawls' theories of justice came to grief a little bit, but Harsanyi was the founder of that idea that if we had, as you mentioned at the beginning, this sort of pre-birth conception of what might
Yes.
be right or wrong,
Uh-huh.
and you were
Uh-huh.
you divorced your own self-interest from that, then you might be able to construct a moral framework that would be consensually agreed upon if you didn't know, if you'd forgotten where you were in that society. And you're absolutely right. I'm using, when I'm using complexity, yeah, I'm using it in the sort of whether it's empirically intractable or not, how much information is converged upon the individual, and how much sifting there is to do in order to, get to the heart of the matter. So yeah, I think from that perspective, it's one of the barriers.
Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to mention, which you touched on as well, is that yeah, it obviously can't be applied to subjective things or things that are a matter of taste. The Aumann's agreement theorem is anchored in the idea of truth being a factor that a strength and a factor that sits above the thing that's being discussed, isn't it? And
Right. Well, I mean, if we're going to be debating, like, is chocolate ice cream or better than vanilla, right? Then, at some point, we need to say what, how will we settle that bet, right? What are the terms, right? What if after all knowledge has been exchanged, I just still prefer chocolate and you still prefer vanilla, right? Then we would just have to say, well, the truth is that we had different preferences, right? So part of the presupposition here is that we are talking about the same world, right? We are asking about the truth or falsehood of something, in a world that we can both observe, right? And to me, like to apply any of this to political disputes, like there's an even more basic presupposition, sort of, that we care about,
yeah,
what is the truth, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
if someone is saying, well, our tax cut is going to turbocharge the economy, right? Then, like, it has to matter. Like, okay, if you cut taxes, then do you actually see the economy improve, right?
yeah.
Like that, if there's no feedback mechanism, if you're just saying that as sort of a slogan, and you can just repeat a failed policy any number of times, and it doesn't affect the outcome, well, then obviously you have no hope of reaching agreement there.
And also, yeah, because I think there are a lot more objective answers than we often care to think. I
Mm.
think if you imagine analyzing the world through an omniscient mind, let's say God gave us access to his
Mm-hmm.
mind,
Mm-hmm.
whereby when we talk about a truth or an objective fact, that is that which would be true irrespective of human opinion about it. Now, I know
Yeah.
obviously some of the things in that set of n facts will be conditioned by human opinion, of course, and human behavior, but
Mm-hmm.
there a lot of the things that I think we think are subjective or term in terms of preference, they are preferential, but they're also based on far more objectivity than I think we often realize. In other words, if we did have access to all the facts, then there would be, for example, a right way to manage an economy, or there would be a right way to have rule of law that's better for the individual in question. There would be a correct level of tax for whatever N incentive was, and then there would be a correct level
I
for
mean,
Y incentive.
It's hard to say, right? I think that some political disagreements really do come down to, there are trade-offs that different interest groups judge differently, right?
Yeah,
Some
agreed.
people
Yeah,
think that it's more important to have, individual responsibility, right? And others think it's more important to have a social safety net, right? And then that might not never be resolved by any amount of evidence. But there are many other disagreements, as you said, that are treated that way, but actually, they're just differing predictions, right? That we all want the society that's prospering and that's where people live long lives, and they have good health care, and they're happy, and they're not committing suicide, and they're not dying of drug overdoses, and they're not in prison. Like, we all want that outcome, and we're just disagreeing about which policies are going to lead to that outcome.
yeah.
And for those questions, it seems like, yes, prediction markets, could help. More generally, forcing people to bet on their beliefs, to sort of state their beliefs as empirical predictions and test them, that could help enormously.
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to what
Yeah.
we're saying about, as you say, having a stake in it, because you notice with say a lot of young people in our country, and probably yours too, a lot of young people tend to be quite left-wing economically because they don't have much of a stake in the economy at that age. And then when they start to have more responsibility, when they become business owners, or when they have a job, which when they actually
they're
start
mugged by
paying
reality.
tax.
Yes.
Yeah, and people tend to move slightly more economically right as they get older. And I think the other thing that's worth mentioning there, I think, in terms of human behavior, is if you took two sets of you group together the amount of things that humans agree on and the amount of things that they disagree on, I think that's another factor which we have to mention, because actually the set of things we agree on is way larger than the set of things we disagree on. And yet it's like the Freudian narcissism of small differences. It's the things that we disagree on that make the headlines. It's the things that we disagree on that make up most of our discussions and conversations.
Right. Now, of course, a left winger might say, well, it's not surprising that people, come to sort of right wing opinions if they weren't born in this, poor community, or this, oppressed or marginalized community, right? But it's sort of not epistemically valid to just form your opinions based on the accident that, well, you weren't born with the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really hard problem to try to sort of see everyone's perspective, right? There will be questions that are just trade-offs of values that maybe cannot be resolved, but then separate out which questions are just empirical predictions, right? Like, you predict that communism, will lead to a utopian society for everyone. Well, okay, that's a prediction that in some sense, we've tested as much
absolutely.
as any social or political question can be tested. And now we have an answer, and that answer was bought at the cost of, hundreds of millions of deaths. But, but now we have it. Right.
And it shows you how powerful the tribal affiliate, because you've probably had this too in America with I think with Bernie Sanders, but we've had this resurgence of socialism in the UK in the last 5 years with a guy called Jeremy Corbyn, who you probably heard of.
Sure.
And no one who remembers when socialism had any influence in this country last, which was the 1970s. No one sensible and rational would want to go back to that. And as you say, the world is a natural. It's a it's a landscape for
Yeah.
testing empirical predictions
Right.
and
Right. I
economic.
mean, these comparisons are hard because in the U.S., many people will say, "Well, what about Sweden and Norway and they all these countries have socialized healthcare and they're doing they're actually doing much better than we are. They have much better outcomes." Right. So I think
Yeah, but
when once you submit yourself to the rigor of empirical evidence, right? You have to, agree that it could go either way, right? It could go in a direction that you don't want. And I mean, I'm someone who I don't know if I should be honored or hurt to be attacked both by left wing and right wing people, constantly on my blog, right? But I am I'm trying to get the right answers. I don't always succeed, but I at least acknowledge that there is no ideological camp that has some a priori monopoly on the right answers.
no, and
I feel like that's a prerequisite to making progress.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
I think I'm similar. I want to talk about that in a minute actually, because I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
also quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, you're in a sense, I believe that truth is such an alien concept to so many people
yeah.
that, as I mean, Plato has said it, and Mark Twain, Tolstoy, that
Mhm.
you're going to suffer if you don't take very partisan views and if you just try to uncover the truth in a
Mhm.
non-partisan way, because people don't actually, it makes people feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I'm there's a
Oh. I mean, people know that like you will never be a reliable ally for their tribe, right?
exactly,
Because
yeah,
you might always be persuaded by some argument made by the other tribe.
yeah. There's a lovely term that Einstein came up with. It's the mind's ability to sort of sift, and he used this for creative endeavors, because Einstein was pretty creative as well, wasn't he? And he came up with
Yes.
in terms of the sort of landscape of exciting possibilities, he called that combinatory play, which I really like,
Mm.
which is that it's the act of sort of, I think he said that it's opening up one mental channel and dabbling in another, and it brings together diverse things to create new ideas and thought processes based on those relationships, and the results that emerge from combinatory play. He
Mhm.
said it's very difficult to induce them deliberately or artificially or even precipitously. They sort of get welcomed and arrived at and greeted when they come upon us. And I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting, because I have a friend who's a physicist and a mathematician, and he and I are very similar. And I think you and I are similar in this way too, and you and him would be similar in that we're not that interested, it seems, from what I've learned of you so far. We love the truth and we value the truth more than we love being part of a particular group. We're more canine than feline. Sorry, we're more feline than canine in that
Well, I
regard.
try I try to be that way. I might fall short of it, right?
Yeah,
Uh
and I've
yes.
noticed with him, he's nothing like me personality wise. I'm very extrovert. I'm very sociable.
Mm.
He's very introverted, and he hides away in his room and he does lots of equations and stuff, and doesn't mind the socializing so much. But what I found between the two of us, and this is one of the reasons why my wife and I have such a great relationship, is because she's very unpartisan as well. She's really
Mm.
open to the truth, and we have a great
Mhm. Mhm.
relationship because of that. And I find that this friend of mine, we pretty much agree on everything.
Mm.
Now, obviously, sometimes that's not healthy either, but the reason why I think the only things that we have as bones of contention, I find, are to matters of degree. It's like, I'm slightly more libertarian and
Mhm.
market friendly than him,
Yeah.
but he appreciates the market, but he's a very highly cautious person, so he has issues around too much freedom and things like that. But fundamentally, we agree on almost everything because we're both looking for the truth. and we still have great discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that the people I disagree with the most are the people that I believe are not fundamental truth seekers, that they're actually living a life of convenience of belief and convenience of viewpoint, which happens to tailor to what they want their life to be like. And I think on my relationship with him, and if you and I were friends, I'm sure we'd have a similar type of relationship. It kind of simulates, in a sense, the Aumannian logical calculation steps, whereby we are quite dispassionately involved in the truth. So we are a bit like computers in that sense. We're trying to converge on that.
I mean, I think that there clearly are people who care more about the truth than others, right? Now the danger, it's almost a paradox, right? As soon as you form a group, that says that, okay, we are the ones who care about the truth, and those other people are just the ones who care, who only care about, what is convenient for them to believe, and so forth. Well, then you've just reproduced the in-group, out-group dynamics that you were trying to avoid, right? And I think you see that happen over and over again in history, right? That people, like, realize that the establishment is just systematically wrong about something, right, or about many things, and they say, so we're going to form a new club of just the truth seekers, the people who care about the truth, right? And then once they've decided that, like, we have a monopoly on truth seeking, and those other people are not even trying to get it right, and then they just reproduce the us versus them dynamics, and they're blind to when actually the other side has gotten it right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's you have to be
Yeah.
careful of that. Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, you do. I mean, it's not just, this is the central thing you have to be careful of.
But equally, if
Yeah.
you're open to the truth in a
Yes.
way that you love the truth, because actually, this is the other thing about truth.
Mm,
Truth underpins every other quality.
mm,
It's every other quality has propositions related to it, whereby the truthful proposition is the most valuable, and that includes
mm-hmm,
love, it includes justice.
mm-hmm,
Any truth is the thing that underpins. So actually, this hypothetical group, yes, you don't want to be so hallowed that you end up in a sort of a pantheon of truth seekers, whereby you dismiss the rest as non-truth seekers. I'm not saying
mm-hmm,
that, but
mm-hmm,
actually, it's a club that, in order to join, you actually don't mind being shown to
mm-hmm.
be wrong as well, because
Right. Yes.
love of truth triumphs, and it trumps the so-called embarrassment and
Yeah.
discomfort that some people have. I don't know what you think, but when people show me a better way of thinking about the world, or they show me somewhere where I was not thinking about it as well as I
Mm-hmm,
could be, I'm actually exhilarated, because I if I debate with somebody and I come away still believing what I believe, then as far as I'm concerned, I've consolidated my position. And that happens a lot with religious discussion,
mm-hmm,
where it's a lot more to do with ethics and
mm-hmm,
value judgments too.
mm-hmm.
But equally, if somebody says to me, actually, James, what you've said, here's a better way of looking at it, I
Yes.
think, great. I've learned something new. I've got a new way of interpreting the world. I can add that to my storehouse of
Mm-hmm,
knowledge, and I'm a better person for it. And I think that's
mm-hmm.
a healthy way to be, because actually we're
Yeah.
all subservient to the power and quality of the truth, whether we like to admit it or not.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I worry about this enormously in the context of social media, especially sites like
Yeah.
Twitter, right? Because my experience, has consistently been that you can, sometimes approach the Omanian ideal, right, in like a relatively small conversation, among people who have different perspectives, but who basically trust each other to be speaking honestly, are trying to understand each other, right? And you can do that even about the most controversial subjects. On my blog, 8 years ago, that was like feminism and dating, and who is life worse for nerdy young men or nerdy young women, basically, and that these were just absolutely explosive questions, and and they did get discussed in the comment section of my blog, and we had men, we had women, we had people from all different perspectives really trying to understand each other, and I feel like actually making progress. But then what happened was that once that got on Twitter, like once it got into the wider social media world, then it just became now just condemn, just this person is saying something that's outside of the narrative we want, so we should just ridicule and embarrass and condemn them as much as possible, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask
and
you about
and
that
so
actually, but
so
yeah,
yeah, so it's kind of like you can have a conversation, you can make progress on these really difficult issues, as long as it's sort of contained among people who are acting in good faith. And then but then what social media does is that it makes it harder to do that, right? It makes it so that as soon as you're talking about anything, then very, very quickly you are performing your view for an audience of, hundreds of thousands of people. And that completely changes the dynamics.
yeah, and
Yeah.
if you're a public figure, then you've got so much at stake, and your reputation and your
Yes.
career. I mean, imagine someone like Richard Dawkins.
Yes.
How is that man going to have a wholly balanced view of whether God exists, given how
Well,
much is invested in it? But and
Well,
yeah,
yeah, no, but I mean, if you are a public figure like Dawkins is, let's say, right, it's very hard to, it becomes very hard to even think out loud, right? To sort of think in the Aumannian way, where you're, and I think that he does a far, far better job than most of, acknowledging when he made a mistake about something, right? But there are like tens of thousands of people who are going to leap on anything he said, and so that is a dynamic that if you are a truth seeker, you have to constantly be on guard against.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I wonder what the effects of, because you and I are probably the right age where we can remember a pre-internet
Yeah.
and the emergence of it, and to the point
Yeah.
where you can now find out anything you want to by a search engine. And the young people that have been brought up with that way of life and know no different, that it's very natural to them. I think I wrote a blog a while back, and it was to do with whether we've reached peak stupid, which it wasn't the term I invented.
Always dangerous to make a pronouncement that we've reached peak stupid.
Exactly, and I wouldn't want.
There are always new depths to plumb.
I know, but it's a curious thing that we
Yeah.
have in the last 15 years or so. Never has never has a society, and that never has a global society really had so much information
Mm.
poured onto them at any one time. And
Mhm.
remember, of course, we've evolved minds for the savannah ultimately, and we haven't evolved minds over 200,000 years or so that have equipped us to deal with this kind of information overload. So we can't avoid outsourcing our thinking to other agents. But I mean, I would, at the risk of not sounding too hubristic, I think it's less of a seduction for people like ourselves, because we know that I'm sure we do it too, but there's not enough of a payoff to join that kind of mentality for us, I think. But for young people who really are working, I mean, who are fighting their life battles, and they don't really know what they believe about a lot of things, they're getting drawn into this world where the Overton window has shifted so much, and what to them is now even like a normal question about what gender am I? You know, that's a question now that young people in even at primary school age are now asking themselves, whereas 25, 30 years ago, it was a marginal consideration for a few people. And I think the internet, yes, I wrote a blog called "The Internet is Making Us Smarter but More Divided." So it is making us more knowledgeable, but we're not doing great things so
Right. I
much with
mean,
the information, are we? Because
right.
there's so much
Right.
of it.
Right. I mean, there's a theory that, there have always been people who believe that, the government is controlled by Satanist child molesters, or,
Yeah,
whatever ridiculous thing, right? But those people sort of never had a voice before, right? They were always sort of confined to the margins and disenfranchised. And the internet, I am old enough to remember, the 90s, when, the big promise was that it was going to democratize information and give everyone a voice. And it turns out that it's delivered on that promise, right? But, that what many people, wanted to say once they had a voice was absolutely horrifying,
yeah,
right? And we're now just, in the multi-decade process of working through the consequences of that.
yeah. Absolutely. And one thing you touched on a moment ago, which I wanted to ask you about as well, is you talked about a kind of the idea of a symposium of truth seekers and what have you. And I remember you I don't have your paper memorized, but I remember in the paper you asked the question, rather than having Alice and Bob, what about if it's Alice, Bob, and another person? So
Yeah.
how how does your element of the theorem respond to predictions about when other agents are involved? Does that increase the probability or decrease it, do you think?
Okay, good. So now we've gone from these sort of loftiest societal questions back to a straightforward technical question, right? But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so I did study the generalization of the setting to, let's say, n players, or n agents,
Yep.
rather than just two.
Hmm.
And what I proved was that, it might, take more messages exchanged, right? Because, now there are, information has to travel from any person to any other person,
Yeah.
right? And now, if I had, let's say, two disconnected subcultures, that never talk to each other at all, well, then, of course, you might never equilibrate between them, right? You might never reach agreement between them. So the key question is, if you look at the graph of who is talking to whom, right, is that graph connected? Right?
Mm.
Meaning, can information propagate from any person in the group to any other person in the group, right? And as long as there's enough, information propagation between any pair of people in the group, then the agreement will happen, in a number of steps that scales, like, like the number of, the scales with the number of people, and also with how certainly and how accurately you need them to agree.
Do you have any predictions on the time differential then? Do the execution steps increase or decrease with an I know there's more information
Oh,
to
well, okay. I
sift.
mean, this is again, this is still in the setting where we're imagining that all of the people have common priors,
Yeah,
have
yeah,
common knowledge of each other's honesty and rationality. And once you've granted those assumptions,
yep.
right, then it's really just a question of are they all speaking to each other in a graph that is sufficiently well connected?
Right. Yeah,
Mean,
okay.
and then the time that they'll need to reach agreement now depends, both on how accurately and how certainly you need them to agree. That's that 1/delta times epsilon squared thing that I mentioned before, but now also on the length of the chains of, communication, like how long it takes a message to propagate from any given person to any other.
Yeah, so if we imagine, say, let's say a sort of scene of the crime
Mm,
scenario where you have um, n amount of evidence, um, and two detectives on the scene.
yes.
Let's imagine two scenarios where in scenario A, we have a third detective joins the investigation
Mm,
and doesn't have any more information, but
mm,
has increased contributions in terms of reason and analysis. And
mm,
then a second scenario where the third detective comes into the investigation but has new information to impart.
mm,
Then I know they're not logic machines like computers, but
mm.
what are the likely scenarios in terms of differences in execution time, do you think, in those two scenarios? I know there's a lot of contingent factors,
Sure.
but um,
That's a very interesting question that I didn't prove a theorem about. I would want to think about it more. Okay, but one thing that I'll say right now is that this whole setup that we're assuming here, doesn't really account for the contributions made by someone who just has more powers of analysis of
hmm,
already known facts, right? The crazy thing about Bayesians is that, like, in the basic framework of Bayesian reasoning, right? There are just the facts and the facts that you don't know, right?
yeah,
And there's the probabilities over the possible states of the world, right? And as you gain more facts, then that causes you to update your probabilities. But it's sort of not part of this framework that you have to think more in order to learn more of the facts, right? You're just assumed to already know all of the logical consequences of what you already believe, right?
yeah,
Now, of course, as applied to real life, that's completely ludicrous, right? If we all knew the logical consequences of everything that was known to us, then we would all be perfect chess players, right? And we could all break any encryption system, right? And and there would be no need for mathematicians. We would just instantly see the truth of Fermat's last theorem, or we wouldn't have to work hard for any of this. And so there's actually a lot of research over the past couple decades trying to extend the Bayesian framework to what you could call boundedly rational agents,
yeah.
who don't necessarily know all the logical consequences of their beliefs, and who have to invest a lot of time and thought to figure them out. But then it becomes much more complicated, right? That's a very difficult undertaking. So in your setting where you have two detectives and then a third detective comes up, right? If I modeled that in this Bayesian setup, right, I would just say each one has some set of beliefs,
Yeah.
right? If the third one has no relevant information about the crime, right, they still have some hunches. They still have some beliefs about it, and that's still going to affect the other two detectives, right, when they have this conversation. But I could imagine that depending on details, it could go either way.
Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah,
that's why we
yeah.
have to revert back to the point earlier, which is that actually getting people to agree isn't the fundamental here, because what
Mm.
it's getting them to assent to what is the truth. I mean,
Well,
two left-wing extremists might agree on communism, but it doesn't mean that it's a healthy agreement. And
mm.
we we I think we should probably close soon, because
Yeah,
it's been a great. I
yeah.
want to.
No, but I would say it's not, once you say we just have to get people to agree on the truth, right? Well, this is, I guess people have been saying that since Plato, right? But
Hmm,
then, there's it includes a secret presupposition that, we just have to get everyone to agree with me, right? To agree with the truth that I know, right? I would rather say we have to get everyone to agree on sort of a truth-seeking epistemology.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's a great way for me to ask my final question, because
Okay.
um the context of my book
Mm.
is it's a letter, or it's a series of letters that an older person has, you know, that whole thing about what I wish I could say this to my younger self. Well,
Yeah.
obviously we
Yeah, I've
can't
thought
do.
about that a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the context of one of the references to Aumann's agreement theorem is in this book, whereby an older person is writing to the younger person saying, you know, what a brilliant theorem this is, and how it's used as a vehicle for encouragement. When I discovered it in 2012, what excited me about it wasn't just that it's a beautiful and elegant theorem, it's that I was I was excited about sharing that with people, because I loved its beautiful simplicity, and I also love the fact that it's algorithmic as well in its ability to influence and encourage people to, as you say, join the party and see the adventure and the benefits of truth seeking.
Mhm.
Because the thing about truth seeking, which I often say to encourage people, is that you are the only version of your particular self that's ever existed. You are a unique person, and the only way to fulfill your potential and for that self that's you to make the biggest impact you can possibly make, and that is also learning about what your skills and talents are and how you can leave an impression and live a full life, is by seeking the truth. Because by seeking the truth, you find out things about yourself that live in accordance with the blessings that you can bestow on each other. So my final question for you is, having known it for so long, and given how much pleasure it clearly gives us, and thank you so much for your contributions to the theorem yourself, how can we use it as a force for good of the world? Is it just a case of telling more people about it, getting them excited about it, and about the love of truth seeking too?
I mean, to ask for a theorem to sort of fix what is broken in the world is a very high burden to place on any theorem,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, I would say that for people to realize that they are not in sole possession of the truth, right? That they can learn from others, that that they might be mistaken, that they should update their beliefs, that they should try to predict what will happen. That if they're, if they have a theory, it should pay rent. It should, help them, be less surprised by what's happening in the world. And if they're constantly surprised, then maybe, the problem is with their theoretical framework, and they should
Mm.
seek a new and better framework. And that the way to do that is by discussion and criticism. It's not name calling, it's not ganging up, it's not sneering. It's trying to respond to the best arguments that the other side made, not the worst arguments, right?
Yeah.
Try, all of these things, right? Like, you don't need to know Aumann's theorem in order to be on board with any of that, right?
No.
And there are even people who do know Aumann's theorem and who maybe are not on board with this, right? Who just fail, for very common, human reasons, right? But I think that what the theorem does is it sort of paints a picture of, this is what the ideal reasoners look like, right? And we may not reach that ideal, but we can at least try to approach it. We can ask, are our institutions or are our social media platforms set up in such a way as to push us closer to that ideal or further away from it? And if they're pushing us further away from it, then maybe we need to change them.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
that's an excellent point as well, because
yeah.
the point of having a journey and having progress is that you have standards,
Mhm.
and if we aim high with those standards, then we're much more likely to get to a higher place ourselves, because
Yeah.
the standard mustn't be too low for the adequacy of the task. And I
Mhm.
mean, you mentioned, the when you mentioned about looking at the other side, there's a famous term, straw manning, isn't there, where you
Yes,
I
that's
love
right.
I love the opposite of that, steel manning,
Steel
which is,
manning, exactly. Yeah,
and I
that's
think
that
the
is what people call it.
the
Yes.
yeah, there's the economist Brian Kaplan. He came up with the ideological Turing test, didn't he? Which is
Mhm.
basically to work out how much of the opposition you understand and try to argue from their perspective, and make sure
Mhm.
that in doing that, that you strengthen your position and that you actually understand what it is you're arguing against. And if you give that
Mhm.
opposing viewpoint the benefit of the doubt and the best chance in your own reasoning, then yeah, you can't
Mhm.
lose, because why would you
Yeah.
want to do anything other than that?
No. So some of the things I've enjoyed most at scientific conferences is when they have debates, like let's say string theory versus, anti, pro or con, or interpretation of quantum mechanics. Are there many universes, or are there only one? But they have people debate the opposite of the position that that they've been known for in all of their books and their blog posts.
Hmm.
Or maybe like you have a coin flip to decide who has to argue which position,
Yeah,
right?
I like that. Yeah,
I think you wouldn't want that all the time, but I think that at least sometimes you ought to have the steel manning the opposing side. It's a very important epistemic exercise for us all
yeah,
to.
absolutely. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I read an example where, um, if you like, there were four people on each side,
Mm.
and let's say they're, I don't know, Democrats and Republicans,
Hmm.
and each has to come forward and argue for the opposition,
Hmm.
and you have to guess which one out of the four was actually
Ah,
the Republican,
right, right.
say, arguing for Democrats. And I think
Right,
that's very
right. No, no. I mean, you don't want the debate club mentality where people just
no,
say, well, all that matters is my arguing skill, and I can just argue for either side equally because it doesn't matter, right?
yeah,
There is no truth. There's just better or worse debaters. Like, no, that's not the point at all, right? There is a truth that you're trying to reach, but in order to reach that truth, it is an excellent exercise to be able to steelman the opposing case
absolutely.
as well as we
And
can.
yeah, and that's what underpins the
Mhm.
beauty of Aumann's
Mhm.
theorem, is that there is a truth to
Mhm.
converge on.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's a great place to end. So,
Great.
Scott, thank you so much for joining me. I've really
Of
enjoyed the
course.
discussion, and I hope
Of
the viewers
course.
will too. I'm sure they'll find lots of interesting things about it to ponder. So
Yeah.
yeah, really appreciate you being my guest on the show,
Yeah.
and
Well, thank you for having me.
thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
And thank you. That was Scott Aaronson. And just want to say that below in the comments is my link to my blog. Please do have a look, and you'll see many different arguments and interesting topics, hopefully. So thank you for tuning in, and good night.